Hello all my Kenvians and welcome to a brand new episode of Discovering Steven Universe. Today the episode I'm going to be watching is Keystone Motel, and as I said at the end of the previous video, I really have no idea what this episode is going to be about. I mean, sometimes the episode names have something to do with what's going on, sometimes they're just kind of there. Maybe they just go to a place called the Keystone Motel. I don't know. But let's get right into it and begin the episode.
Just looking for Paradise. She's bound to be somewhere, right? Any new ideas?
Dang.
Is this a bad time?
Possibly.
No, please continue. Well, I gotta drive over to the next state, Keystone.
You mean the Keystone State?
Right, the state named Keystone. I met a guy on an internet message board who's selling car wash brushes. It'll have a pool and free ice, and it's right next to the best diner in the world.
I'm coming too.
What?
Really?
Even better!
Hey, Garnet.
Well, goodbye. This is gonna be fun, right, Dad?
Poor Greg.
An internet man. If I'm not back in an hour, call the police.
Calm down. If you're not going to listen, then you can just go.
Oh.
Past this, Ruby.
She lied to us, so we would form a ridiculous. Just because she
I'm not sure what to say here.
You laid a warm spot. Ah, a hot spot. Boiling.
Oh. Oh
I'm gonna go back. Sapphire?
Hello, Steven.
no. Okay, so fire and ice.
Doing okay?
I'm fine.
Okay.
Clearly.
You wanna watch TV together? Sapphire? The toilet's frozen.
Such is fate.
I needed to pee outside in the grass too.
Yes.
Hey, Schnewball.
Steven! I was so happy when Garnet said she was gonna come on this trip with me and Dad. Home's been awful. Here's been awful. I thought you wanted to have a fun time, but everyone's been acting awful too. It just came with us. I don't understand. Is it me? No.
Aww.
Steven, it's all us.
Wait.
I'm sorry.
She only has one eye.
I'm not upset about what happened. You're embarrassing me in front of Steven.
Aww.
And for breakfast. And the...
She's speaking to me again. Kind of.
That really was a great trip.
Well, I mean,
Can we go back?
Maybe one day, but not to that diner. Oh, boy.
poor Greg. That was definitely different. There's no doubt about that. That end theme definitely was different. And I apologize if maybe this reaction portion of the video wasn't very interesting. I was caught up in what all was going on, but I'm going to take a second to put all my notes together, and I will see you all in the next portion of the video for the reaction portion of this video. I really need to start scripting this out, don't I? Anyway, see you in a minute. Alright everyone, welcome back to the review portion of this video for Keystone Motel. And, okay, before I get into any of this, really, there's one thing that I'm really curious about that really has nothing to do with the show or the plot as a whole, but okay, so they went to Keystone State, the state of Keystone, which is apparently a state where they live. So, do they live in just a completely fictional United States? Because to the best of my knowledge, I mean, I'm sure there's probably other places that refer to, like, individual areas as states, but it's, I mean, being from the US, the United States, it just kind of works in my mind. But I don't know if it's even ever really established, but do they live in a sort of fictional United States? I mean, it is Earth, and it's Beach City, which, I mean, Lord knows that could be any of them. Or maybe Keystone State is supposed to represent a different state? I don't know. I don't know. I'm overthinking things, most likely, but if there is any sort of explanation, what is Keystone State? And if there is a sort of explanation, I would like to know what it is, because chances are it's not really anything that ties deeply into the plot. But, okay, moving on from my confusion there, let's move into my favorite parts about this episode, starting with the fact that it picks up, well, not immediately after, but shortly after where the previous episode left off. And I mean, there have been a few episodes like that before, but it feels like these were so close together in proximity. I think like the only one that was closer was between The Return and Jailbreak, I think. Well, and then I guess technically Jailbreak in the next episode. But again, she's like, I like the fact that it picks up where the previous episode left off. The only thing that has really changed is that, well, nothing has changed. Garnet's still extremely angry with Pearl. Pearl is doing everything she can to try and get out of that situation, and things are still just very unresolved at that point. But my next favorite part about this episode was just the simple idea of the road trip with Greg, Steven, and Garnet. I was definitely taken by surprise by the fact that Garnet wanted to, but it makes sense that, you know, Garnet was wanting to get away with an excuse. Yeah, I guess that kind of makes sense, because, I mean, technically she could go away whenever, but she's part of the team, so she's sort of, or she's the leader of the team, so she has to be there to help them, but since they would know that she is with Steven and Greg, again, overthinking things, but I just like that whole aspect of the road trip. And there have been a few others, like when Steven and Amethyst hopped on the train and went down to what they found was the kindergarten. But you know, I just like these road trip episodes, and I hope they do some more of those in the future. Maybe one that's more of an actual road trip instead of just going to the motel or a hotel or whatever. I'm going to shut up about that now and move on to my next part. My next favorite part was seeing Ruby and Sapphire separate again. Obviously, the circumstances were not the best, but the fact that we get to see them and we get to see how the two different personalities, like two very distinctly different personalities, are working through or trying to work through the situation they're in. With Ruby, the clearly irrational would be one way to describe her, but also just more hot-headed, more quick to jump to conclusions, like how she deals with it. And then on Sapphire's side, because she is the one that has that future vision, she's the one where that gives Garnet that ability. She knows what's going to happen, and therefore, you know, she just kind of sees like, you know, everything's going to work out in the end. Everything's going to be fine. So she sees the future, but not the present, which is something that is addressed directly in this episode, and I'll most likely bring it up again here in just a minute. My next favorite part of this episode was the concept of the hot and cold extremes. And in addition to this favorite, I'm going to bring up one of my questions of the episode. which is, are the hot and cold extremes triggered by their emotions? Which, throughout this episode, it seems to be. It's like Ruby's hot-headedness leads to the great generation of heat to where she almost kind of boils Steven alive, scarily enough. And then also on Sapphire's part, it's like, she's very cold, she's collected, and that comes out in the extreme frigid cold, freezing the entire room. And I'm curious whether that is something that plays into the characters in general. There is a hornet in my office. Holy crap. So if hi. Hi there. How'd you get in? Anyway, to continue. What was I saying? Well, yeah, with the hot and cold extremes, I'm curious whether or not that's something that only plays on their emotions, or if there's something else that plays into it, and whether or not other gems sort of have that capability. It's like, it was very situational here, but is it always heat and fire with Ruby? Is it always ice and frigidness with Sapphire? Like, what would it be with Pearl? What would it be with Garnet in that situation? I'm really interested to know about that. Okay, but moving on from there, and again, it's like, that's one of my questions. So if you do have an answer that I would like to know, unless it's maybe a major plot point, I don't think it would be. So yeah, open invitation there for that question. My next favorite part, and it's definitely one of the sadder parts, but it's one of those truly human elements of this show that comes out so well. And it's when, after Ruby and Sapphire have their fight in the diner, and Steven, like, he's so upset and he throws his dish down, and, Ruby and Sapphire realize, it's like, that they've only been, concentrating on their own mindsets. It's like, they haven't been taking anyone else into account. They haven't even been taking each other's feelings into account. And Steven is so upset by it. It's like, because the things are bad at home. Things have been bad there. It's like, it just kind of follows him everywhere. And he's worried that it's something he's done. Like, it's something that he has done, that it's his fault that these problems are going on, because in his mind it's like it's following him. And that's something that is so, I feel like to say it's childlike is not giving it the justice it deserves, but it's a very human emotion. It's a very human mindset that, when things are going wrong, when it concerns people you love around you, and in your mind the common thread is you, that you can't help but think, it's like, it must be my fault. But, obviously, luckily, Ruby and Sapphire pull themselves together in that moment, and they realize what they had been doing. Sapphire realizes that she had been looking into the future when things were okay so much that she didn't take into account how Ruby felt then, and even how Steven felt then, because of how, really both of them had treated him earlier in the episode, again, with Ruby nearly boiling him to death and just yelling at him, not listening to him. And then Sapphire just very coldly, like, communicates with him some, but doesn't really look outside of her, doesn't look outside of her own personal perspective. But, that brings us to my next favorite part of the episode, which is Garnet returns, and also Sapphire has one eye, which explains the whole 3 eyes thing. I don't know if that just never dawned on me before. I don't think we had seen that she had one eye in their previous appearance, to the best of my knowledge. And that actually makes a lot of sense, that when she was crying, the tears were going down the middle of her face. I thought it was maybe just like cascading that way, but no, it makes sense. She only has one eye. But yeah, I really enjoyed the reconciliation between those two when Garnet returned. And I mean, let's face it, Ruby and Sapphire are easily two of the most adorable characters on this show. I mean, especially, almost entirely referring to when they are just being lovey-dovey with each other, and Ruby is embarrassing Sapphire. It is just the cutest thing, and I love them to death. But, yeah, moving on from there, my final favorite part of this episode is that we get this last little bit when they get back to the house. And it's when Garnet does actually, she at least communicates with Pearl. And it shows that, Garnet, through Ruby and Sapphire, is like, they've come to start rebuilding their relationship. It's like they're building themselves up to being able to talk with Pearl, to be able to forgive her. And so that healing has begun. It's like in the very, very, very early stages. But again, still the healing has begun, and that's one of the most important aspects of the relationship and how the healing of that relationship is going to take effect. So yeah, those are all my favorite parts of this episode. As for annoyances, I really didn't have any. The only one that I could kind of think of was around the idea that some of the animation was just bizarre, and I know it's because they're trying to show these exaggerated emotions, and especially showing how angry Ruby is at certain points, but it was just very overly bizarre animation at certain moments. But that's about as close as I really got to an annoyance with this episode. Otherwise, I thought it was really good. Moments of terror? None. Thankfully. It looked like there might have been the potential for some if Steven hadn't gotten out of that pool quickly enough. But, let's see. Oh, well, before I move on, if you have any of your own favorites or annoyances that you would like to talk about in regard to this episode, please do leave them in the comments down below. But also, moving on from there, the tracks of the episode, or in this case, track of the episode, as always, don't really have the title, but I'm referring to it as the Ruby and Sapphire Reconcile. It's the very sweet, soft little piano music playing in the background when they reconcile, when Steven, lets it show how upset he is, and it was just a really nice, sweet, subtle backdrop of music. So I really like that. If there is an actual track name and you know it, I would love to hear what it is. But yeah, track of the episode for me, but for sure. Let's see. Now, as for quote of the episode, there were quite a few, pretty decent lines. Nothing that truly stands out in my memory, at least. But the one that definitely came closest was the one that made me just laugh, and that's when after they get to the hotel, or the motel, and Greg is getting ready to go to meet this guy that's selling him the brushes, he says, "If I'm not back in an hour, call the police." It was a combination of the way it's said, the way they animated it, it just worked perfectly, and it was just a hilarious line. So yeah, that was definitely my quote of the episode. If you have any of your own, or any other lines that you prefer more, possibly something that was exchanged between Ruby and Sapphire, I would love to hear what that is. So yeah, feel free to let me know what those quotes might be. Now, moving on to my question of the episode was going to be questions, but obviously I brought up earlier that, the question of, are the hot and cold extremes triggered by emotion with Ruby and Sapphire? So the question left for this episode is there anything different in Garnet's design now? That is one thing that I've noticed and have learned looking online, is that whenever a gem recedes into its gem and then comes back out, there is a slight design changes. And sometimes slight, sometimes bigger. It's happened with Amethyst, it's happened with Pearl. Pearl primarily like that sash around her waist after the hollow Pearl stabbed her. And then even with Garnet after they got back together in Jailbreak, there was just, it was more subtle, but there was some color change to them, there was a color change to Garnet overall, just sort of like a different hue of purple and slightly different design. So I'm curious, after this split up and them getting back together, if there's anything that has changed with the design. I mean, I may look it up and see if there was anything, or maybe it's one of those deals where it only really occurs when they are forced apart, or like in the case of Garnet at the end of the Return, because they were forced apart and both Ruby and Sapphire were forced into their gems to recover. Maybe that's why the design change happened. So, again, overthinking things, but if you all do know whether or not there was a design change between the beginning of this episode and then Garnet at the end, I would definitely like to know what it is. I'm curious. But moving on from there, as far as theories go, I don't really have any. I feel like the reconciliation between Garnet and Pearl will probably happen in the next episode. Maybe the one after that, depending on what the focus of the next episode is. But yeah, overall, no real true solid theory that I can think of. But as for my overall thoughts of this episode, I really enjoyed it. It was one of those where I felt more drawn into the episode than some of the others. There clearly wasn't a lot of action. It was more story-based. It was more drama-based in this case. And it just kind of had me enwrapped the whole time. So again, while it wasn't exactly an action-packed episode, it was a good, solid one, and one that I could see myself watching again, easily. So yeah, those are my thoughts. A really good, solid episode, and I'm ready to move on to the next one, which the next episode is going to be Onion Friend. I wonder who that one could be about. Somehow I feel like we might not get the reconciliation just in the next episode. It might happen after that one. I'll have to wait and see. But as always, everyone, if you have any of your own favorites, annoyances, quotes, tracks of the episode, so on and so forth that you would like to share, please do leave them in the comments down below. Any of your thoughts that you would like to share about what I've had to say, would love to hear your thoughts as well. But until next time, everyone, I am Papa Ken, and I will see you for the next episode of Discovering Steven Universe, Onion Friend.